Hey class, in this video I'm introducing the JavaScript programming language, and it's kind of a big one because we are going to be using JavaScript throughout the semester. And so I'll talk a little bit about what JavaScript is and how it works, and then we'll learn some of the basics of writing JavaScript. I'll go over some basic setup stuff as well, and then we'll get into starting to create the first assignment, which is going to be creating a self-portrait using JavaScript, and specifically the P5 library. And I'm trying out this new little title graphic to make the videos look a little prettier. And this graphic setup was actually built with JavaScript. To get started, I'm going to open up GitHub first. This is a good thing to get in the habit of if you're using different computers or going to the computer lab or doing other things like that. You're going to be updating your website from different sources, and so you want to click on this fetch button just to make sure that everything you have is up to date. The convenient thing about the GitHub app is we can also use the buttons down here. So if we have our repository open and we don't have any new changes, if I click open in Sublime Text, it's going to open up my repo in Sublime Text for me. I can also do that by going to repository and clicking open in Sublime Text. So that's an easy way to open up my project and also make sure that it's the correct project connected with my GitHub. I can also click show in Finder, which is just going to bring up this Finder window for me. We can see it's the desktop here. So it's really just the folder right there, and I can always just drag that over to Sublime Text as well if I want to. But one of the convenient things about GitHub is these buttons on here. So I'm going to click open in Sublime Text. And we're going to be making some new files and adding some JavaScript and working on like our first real project for the class. So I'll be going over a lot of setup. We'll be downloading some files and the P5 library, and I'll talk a little bit about what those things are. And then eventually we'll get to start building our project. So first, let's talk a little bit about what JavaScript actually is. And to start, we're working on this web page, and we have a couple of files in here already. We have the index.html, we have the style.css. And those are two of our sort of foundational web languages, HTML and CSS. And the third language, that's really the main language in web programming, is JavaScript. And all of these languages run on what's called the front end, or the browser side of our web experience. So if we are looking at a browser, let's say this is Chrome, and we have a website here, all of these languages are running in the browser as we're loading the website. Anything that's getting loaded from a database or other things like that, those are going to be using other languages. So I'm going to draw our browser page a little bit bigger here, just to show how this works. So HTML is for content and some of the basic structure of the site. So the HTML will have things like the title or the header of the site, so like an H1. It's going to have things like links to other sites, like to the, maybe the user's personal page or other things like that. And then it's going to have our content, like our text and our images. So that's HTML. That's all the content of the site. So I'll just put a little content here. CSS is styling. That's why we always call our CSS file style.css. So style.css determines things about how our site looks, like the color, the typography, what fonts we use, the layout, like how where the images versus the titles and other things like that appear on our page. And so JavaScript is the last part, and JavaScript creates dynamic interactions on the site. So a lot of websites exist with just HTML and CSS. If you're just reading a news article or reading a paper or reading a chapter in a book or looking at some images, you can achieve most of that functionality just with HTML and CSS. Where JavaScript comes in is with interactivity. So interactivity is user input that changes what we see on the page. And we're going to look at a bunch of different ways to do that throughout the semester. So at the beginning, we're just going to be drawing some graphics, but within a couple of weeks, we're going to be adding user input. So the user can use the keyboard, the user can use the mouse. In modern, web applications, we also have video input like the camera. We have audio input like a microphone. So we can detect all of these things using JavaScript, and then we can make changes to the content of the screen based on those changes. So in this video, a lot of what we're going to be doing is just setting up our environment so that we can use JavaScript and going over some of the basics. But this interactivity, this idea of having a user interact with the content on our website is really the main idea that JavaScript, or the main functionality that JavaScript sort of brings to the table. So with that little intro done, let's set up our environment because we are going to be using a specific library called P5. So I'm going to go and open a new Chrome window. And I'm going to go to the P5 website. So the P5 website is p5js.org. I'll link to this in the video. If you just Google P5JS, you'll also come up with it. And what P5JS is just a library that has some built-in functionality that allows us to write JavaScript in a quicker way. It's sort of like Bootstrap or other CSS frameworks that you might have seen before, that it kind of recreates very common functionalities, so we don't have to spend time building stuff from scratch. We can just go ahead and start making some graphics and using user input without spending a lot of time, figuring out how to do that in the browser. P5 comes from another language called processing. I don't know if there's a link to that. Yeah, here it is. So it's an interpretation of processing to work specifically with JavaScript and the web. Processing is basically a language that was created sometime around maybe 2001. Let's see if it says something on here. I don't see the date on here. Oh, here we go, 2001. So it's almost 20 years old, and it's basically a language that was specifically designed for artists, designers, and also educators to be able to write code in a much more semantic manner, so using concepts that we're familiar with, and writing code in a bit faster manner so that we're not dealing with all the nitty-gritty things like the hard drive and RAM and memory on the computer. We're really just thinking about more high-level things like colors and layouts and other composition and ideas like that. So we are going to be using P5. There's a lot of different ways to use P5. We'll be downloading the library and embedding it in a project with an HTML and a CSS page. And so that's going to make it a little bit easier for us to organize our files. There are a lot of different ways to do this, and there's no wrong way to do it. And so if you have other setups that are more convenient for you, that's totally fine. The setup I'll be going over is one that I tend to use and I'm very familiar with, which makes it a lot easier for me to debug things if students are having issues. So it does kind of streamline the process a little bit, but feel free to try out other editors and other environments and other things as well. So to get started with P5, we just need to download the library. So I'm going to go to the download page. And I'm going to click p5.min.js. And so this is just one file that has the whole library in it. It has .min in it because it's a minified version of the file. So that makes it a bit smaller. It takes out spaces and other parts of the code that aren't necessary. And so once I download that's going to be in my downloads folder. If I open up a new Finder window and go to the downloads, you can see there's p5.min.js. And we don't need to really read or write anything in this file. We just need to make sure we have the right version of it. And you can see that in the first line here in the Mac preview, you see p5.js version 1.1.9, July 22, 2020. So that's pretty recent. So we can be relatively certain that that's a recent version of the file. So there is a community of developers that is constantly updating and contributing to P5 to make it work better. And so we do want to make sure from time to time that we take a look at what the newest version of the program is to make sure that we have it in our project. So we're going to put that inside a new project. So I'm going to leave this window up here, and I'm going to open up my MMP 210 folder. So I'll go to the desktop and click on MMP 210, and I'm going to create a new project. This project is the first version of my self-portrait. And so with this one, we're just going to get used to P5 by adding some colors and shapes and trying to create a drawing using P5. And we'll develop this over the next couple of weeks to make it interactive. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it self-portrait. And then I'm going to put underscore version 1, just V1. So very simple, because we're going to make a few versions of this, and we want to be able to keep track of what those versions are. And so I'm just going to drag this library down here. And so I've got that ready to go. And in order to save a little bit of time, I'm going to create a whole new project here with its own index page. But to save a bit of time, I'm going to copy the index page, and I'm going to copy the style.css page as well. So that way I don't have to recreate them. I can just start, and if I want to change them, I can go back and change them. So in the Mac, and as Windows as well, so for the Mac, I'm just going to do Command-C. Windows would be Control. So I'm going to do Command-C on index.html and Command-V. So I'm going to paste that index.html. So I'm making a copy of this index and putting it in here. So all of our folders are actually going to have their own index.html, which is going to make it a lot easier to link between our projects. And then I'm going to copy style.css and paste that in there as well. And so all that's going to go into this self-portrait version 1 folder. I'm going to close my downloads folder and go over to Sublime, and you'll see my folder right here. And under index.html, I'm just going to increase this a bit. I'm just going to take out everything in here. So I don't really need this comment anymore. And I'm going to change the title to portrait version 1. And then I'm just going to delete everything in here for my portfolio up to here. And then I'm going to leave this menu just so I can get back to the home page and the about page. And if I can change this H1 as well, if I want to, I could call this, my self-portrait or self-portrait version 1. You can also leave that as the class portfolio if you want. So most of this page will look the same, but we're going to add some stuff in here in a second. So that's my index.html page. I'm going to leave the style.css page the same for now. We might add some stuff to this later. Okay, so I'm going to get started with the Sublime server. I'll go to Tools and Start Sublime Server. And then I'm going to go back to my Chrome browser and go to localhost 8080 and click on MMP 210. And so we have our class portfolio. This is our home page for the class at just MMP 210. And I do want to be able to click on this project 1 to go here. So let's go ahead and set that up. So I'll go to the index.html. For MMP 210. And so now I have 2 different index.htmls, so this might be a little confusing, but Sublime recognizes that these 2 files have the same name, and so it gives us some context. This is the MMP 210, so that's our main portfolio page, and then this is MMP 210 / self-portrait version 1, so that's the index.html in that folder. So we can tell the difference, and so for our portfolio page, I'm just going to go here. We'll replace the thumbnail at the end of the video. I'm going to go ahead and for the link, I'm just going to put self-portrait v1. Okay, and I don't really have to put, I can put a slash here to indicate it's a folder, but it'll work either way. And I don't have to put the index.html because that's what it's going to look for when it opens that folder. And so I'll just replace this project 1 with a self-portrait version 1. And so now when I reload that page, you can see it says self-portrait version 1. It's a little cramped. Maybe I'll fix that later. But for now, I'm just going to click on here. And so here we see self-portrait version 1. And we have the home page, but we can see that's not working because we're inside of this folder. So we'll fix that. The about page doesn't work either. So we're going to have to fix those links. But everything else is good so far. So here's our main page, and there's self-portrait version 1. So let's close our home page. And if you want to clean it up a little bit, you could also get rid of these other 2 projects over here. But I'm going to leave those for now. So the only other thing we have to change in our HTML is these links. So now that we're inside a folder, inside our main MMP 210 folder, we do need to go back using the .. So I have to do .. here and .. here. And this is going to be kind of the template for all of our projects. So in the future, we'll just recreate this page. So I'm going to refresh and go to self-portrait version 1 and just test. So the home page works and the about page works. So let's go back home and self-portrait version 1. And now we're ready to get started. So let's add P5 to our project. So the first thing I'm going to do here is actually open up the JavaScript console. So the easy way to do this is on Mac, it's Command-Option-J in Chrome. On PC, I think it's Control-Shift-J, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Let's Google it. Windows, Chrome, console. Control-Shift-J on Windows. So Control-Shift-J on Windows, Command-Option-J on Mac. You can also just right-click on the web page and go to Inspect and then switch over to the console. You can also go to Chrome View, Developer, JavaScript Console. So there's a bunch of different ways to get there. I want to have this open as I'm working because it'll show me a bunch of different stuff like errors and other things like that if I need to. And I can also look at the elements page as well. So I can go back and forth between my HTML and CSS down here, and then my JavaScript. Any errors or messages or other things like that are going to show up in the console over here. And I'll be using that throughout the semester, so I'll point out other things that we can do with that as we continue. So I'm actually going to open the Elements tab for a second because we are going to see something in here that we want to take a look at, and then we'll go from there. Back to Sublime Text. So the way that I add my p5.min.js library is a little bit like the way that I add a CSS style sheet. We're linking to an external file, but we're going to use slightly different syntax. So to link a script file or a JavaScript file, we use the script tag. And inside the script tag, our attribute, rather than href, we use source, src. And so the source is p5.min.js. So because our library is just right there in the folder with the rest of our files, so here's our index.html that we're on, and there's the p5.js. So I can link to it just by putting the source right there. And I do actually have to close this tag even though there's nothing inside of it, because you can actually write JavaScript directly right in here if you want to. So we do have to close that tag on the other side. So that's going to load in the library to our memory, but where we're going to write our actual code is in a sketch file. So we're going to write one more script, source equals sketch.js. And then I'm just going to close that tag and close the HTML element. And so these are the 2 JavaScript tags. We're going to just be using these over and over again this semester. So we load the library first because we are going to be using a lot of things that the library provides. And then we load the sketch after that. And these 2 script tags, they can go in different places, but the best place to put them is right before the closing body tag. So they're going outside the rest of our HTML, and we just include them as the last thing inside the HTML body. And so when we do this, nothing's going to happen at first. You will see those script tags, but when we add some JavaScript, then we'll start to see some stuff happen.